All right, let's dive into one of the biggest stories in all of tech. We're talking about how one small software company basically took over the world of personal computing, building an empire that defined an entire generation. This is how Microsoft won the desktop.
It sounds completely made up, doesn't it? But honestly, this is where it all begins. It's a story that's part luck, part genius, and part just being in the right place at the right time with a decision that would literally change the world. So picture this, it's 1980. The behemoth, IBM, is building its first ever PC, and they need one crucial thing, an operating system. So they go to a young Bill Gates. But back then, Microsoft didn't make operating systems, they made programming languages. So Gates actually sends them away to the market leader, a company called Digital Research. But the legend goes that the founder, Gary Kidle, decided to take his plane out for a spin that day and just blew off the meeting with IBM. Can you imagine? So IBM, with a deadline looming, walks right back to Bill Gates. And this time, he sees his chance and says, sure, we can get you an OS, even though he didn't actually have one to sell.
Okay, so Gates is in a pinch. He needs an operating system, and he needs it fast. He and Microsoft find this tiny company in Seattle that had made something called QDOS, the quick and dirty operating system. They buy it outright for what seems like an absolute steal today, just $50,000. They slap a new name on it, MS-DOS, and get it ready for IBM. But as tiny as that number seems, the price tag isn't even the most important part of this whole deal.
This right here is the billion-dollar decision. Digital Research, the other company, was thinking about a one-time sale to IBM. But Microsoft did something that was just pure genius. Instead of selling MS-DOS, they licensed it. This meant they still owned it. And, this is the crucial part, they kept the right to license that same OS to every single other company that was about to start making clones of the IBM PC. That one strategic move laid the foundation for complete and total domination.
So now, with MS-DOS on practically every PC being made, Microsoft was in the driver's seat. But just owning the OS wasn't the endgame. No, that was just the start. They used that power to build a self-reinforcing, unstoppable cycle of growth. And this is exactly how it worked. It's a classic feedback loop. The more computers ran Microsoft's OS, the more developers wanted to write programs for it. I mean, why would you write for anything else? And the more software that was available, the more you, the user, needed a Windows PC. This created this massive flywheel that just spun faster and faster, locking everybody in and pushing any competition right off the map.
Now, here's the really interesting twist. Even with this iron grip on the operating system, Microsoft didn't actually make the most popular apps. The king of spreadsheets was Lotus 1-2-3. The go-to word processor was WordPerfect. These were the killer apps of the day, but they all had one very important thing in common. They had to run on Microsoft's platform, and that gave Microsoft a very big idea.
Yeah, why just own the platform when you can own the most valuable stuff on it too? This was Microsoft's next power play. They decided to go from winning the OS war to winning the application war. And they weren't going to do it by building one slightly better product. They were going to change the entire game.
This quote from the head of the Word division just says it all. The plan wasn't to beat WordPerfect by adding more features to Word. No. The best weapon they had to compete with a word processor was their spreadsheet program, Excel. The whole strategy shifted. The value wasn't in one app anymore. It was in the bundle.
To really get why this works so well, you have to understand the price of software back then. It wasn't a cheap monthly subscription. It was a huge one-time purchase. If you wanted the best word processor, WordPerfect, it would set you back almost $500. Same for the best spreadsheet, Lotus 1-2-3. That is a serious chunk of change for just one program.
So Microsoft comes in with an offer that was basically impossible to say no to. They took their own programs, Word, Excel, and PowerPoint, and bundled them all together into one package, Microsoft Office. And this wasn't just a marketing trick. A young guy named Steven Sinofsky argued that they should be a deeply integrated suite, sharing code and looking and feeling the same to the user.
And this chart just shows you how devastatingly effective that was. For just a little bit more than the price of WordPerfect or Lotus 1-2-3 on its own, you could get Microsoft's entire Office suite. For any person or any business, the choice was a no-brainer. Why buy one great app when you can get 3 pretty good ones for almost the same price?
And on top of Microsoft's brilliant strategy, their competitors just completely fumbled the ball at the worst possible time. Lotus got bought by IBM and was super slow to adapt to the new Windows 95. WordPerfect tried to make its own suite, but it was clunky. And then Microsoft timed the launch of Office 95 to coincide with the global phenomenon that was Windows 95. It was just game over.
So by the late 90s, Microsoft wasn't just a company, it was an empire. But with that kind of power comes a whole lot of scrutiny. Microsoft's next big battle wasn't going to be fought over features or price. It was going to be fought in a federal courtroom, in a case that threatened to tear the whole company apart.
At the very center of the U.S. government's case was this legal idea called antitrust tying. Basically, the government was arguing that Microsoft was illegally using its monopoly power in Windows, that's the tying product, to force everyone to use its web browser, Internet Explorer, the tied product. And in doing so, they argued, Microsoft was unfairly crushing its main competitor, Netscape Navigator.
Now, the judge in this case, Thomas Penfield Jackson, he had some pretty strong opinions. And we know this because, and this is wild, he was secretly giving interviews to reporters while the trial was still going on. He told them he was convinced that Microsoft's reason for bundling the browser wasn't to make things easier for you, the consumer. It was to kill a competitor.
And he didn't stop there. He told these journalists that he found Bill Gates' testimony to be completely unbelievable, that it had no credibility. He said he thought the company's real crime was just pure arrogance, hubris. I mean, these are pretty shocking behind-the-scenes comments, and they would end up having huge consequences. And that brings us to the climax of this whole saga. After finding Microsoft guilty, Judge Jackson didn't just hand down a fine or some new rules. No, he ordered a punishment so severe it sent shockwaves through the entire tech industry and the global economy. The verdict was simple. Microsoft was a monopoly that had abused its power, and the punishment was basically the corporate death penalty. The judge ordered the entire company to be forcibly broken up. And here's what that breakup would have looked like. Microsoft would be sliced into two completely separate companies. One, you could call it OpsCo, would get the Windows operating system. The other, AppsCo, would get everything else, Microsoft Office, Internet Explorer, all the applications. And the two companies would be legally forbidden from working together. So why did the judge go for such an extreme solution? Well, he actually explained it to reporters using this old story about a mule trainer. He said the trainer's secret to getting a stubborn mule to listen was to first hit it with a 2x4. You just have to get his attention, he said. It was pretty obvious he saw Microsoft as the stubborn mule and the breakup order as that 2x4. But here's the final twist. The breakup never happened. A higher appeals court stepped in and threw out the entire order. Now why? It wasn't because they thought Microsoft was innocent. It was because the judge himself had made some huge procedural errors. First, he didn't hold the proper hearings about the breakup itself. And second, and this is the big one, his secret interviews with the press came back to haunt him. The court said it created an appearance of partiality, and they disqualified him from the case. In the end, his own actions undid his own ruling.
So, Microsoft remained a single company. It eventually reached a settlement with the government, agreed to a bunch of new rules, and the case was finally over. But it really marked the end of an era of Microsoft's unchecked power and would go on to shape how the company behaved for decades.
So, what's the takeaway from all this? When you look back, was Microsoft's rise just a story of brilliant strategy and incredible timing? Or was it the story of a ruthless monopoly that would do anything to crush its competition? The truth, as it usually is with these big stories, is probably somewhere in the middle.